they decided to hold off on those hires until June. Because they're waiting for some returns from first quarter to come back. So it's like, all right, well, maybe some will be there. Well, one, actually, one of them this morning.
What's the group with the beer?
For a year. Okay, so.
But I probably will
So
rather.
yeah, and then there's a whole bunch of backing positions, so yeah, like, I didn't really see what we're talking about. Are you? Do you know Ryan? He's a React guy. Yeah, he's got a lot of React resources. So,
We tried.
so yeah, I mean, he's got one on the Microsoft stack, but he's pretty strong.
So is Jey okay?
He's out in the hospital.
Damn.
Yeah, he's out. You mean like one painkiller?
I thought it was the other stuff.
I mean, it was like, yeah, with the odds were like, because I was headed to meet with him this morning, and I'm halfway there. He goes, Ted, I'm headed to the hospital, and I was like, what? He's like, I just woke up in a ton of pain.
Oh, I see.
Things aren't right. So I'm gonna get checked out. I didn't want to be discreet about it, but he was just unforgivable.
Well, I'm gonna do the.
He's a healthy guy. Yeah. He doesn't get knocked down.
Which is at 8.
I was just like, boom, you're out.
That's crazy. My father-in-law had that happen one time. It's no joke.
No, it is no joke. It will knock you out cold.
Sorry?
Are you with Mike?
Aye.
Yeah, wonderful. Do you want to co-host?
Yeah. Corey and I sort of co-hosted. Yeah, they usually had it. Yeah, there might be a card in the front desk. Business cards in the front desk, I think, with Wi-Fi and
Yeah, it's just too bad.
Actually, the same guys presenting change, same topic, but sets of presenting it's going to be a little more technical than the original. Yeah, he actually, this is the one that's on the topic, so if you want to challenge No, not a hot.
Yeah. Starts to work on playing new ones.
Is this work from home?
Yeah.
This isn't working from home?
I hear you.
Partly,
I've been
she's
almost done with
she sort of got two different, part-time piecework gigs. Yeah, just a couple days ago, she heard from a friend about another thing that has to be very lucrative if it's real. But the current stuff, one thing is just carpenters, she's doing it at home.
So you see this?
Let's get out of the house and do some coffee shops.
How are you?
And then she He's got a set of things for Jey.
So you're gonna get more involved in this?
What?
You're gonna get more involved in this company?
I mean, I'm pretty heavily involved. Like, I mean, I man another tech and keep it all in line. It's kind of not always non-stop things. It's kind of, it's all on AWS. It's auto scale. But I'm pretty much committing about 10 hours.
So if we see
I was gonna ask how it works with all your check stuff and everything else.
That's just and this Jey and I were swapping hours. So he was contributing to Best Vue and I was contributing to both of them. CodeWizards. And what ended up happening was my hourly contribution was like 5x. The opposite direction. I mean, we just didn't have the need, and so although we had to balance, we got out of sync. So we basically having an event where we just snap it all into equity and wash hands. I love working with him. We meet just about every week, Fridays. We kind of cover tasks. I mean, I essentially take kind of a CTO role. But then as users ramp, I'll kind of work my way over and do more. I mean, I've been pretty deeply involved. Anytime any tech goes sideways, I'm on a phone call. So. But it's just been kept to the side.
I'm gonna take you off here. Initially, so that I can
No, that's fine.
Introduction.
Yeah, I'll just get to these. Yeah.
I'm struggling with that one myself right now.
Code protection and all that stuff. You look pretty hard.
Many solutions come up on the baby.
I did hack reactor here. I mean, one of the frameworks you can have some sort of object code that you can put in there, and basically you can call that code from
Down on the fifth floor here.
so you put your secret sauce in the code, and then everything else can that thing. I mean,
So it's like a synchronous basically.
Oh, okay. Sounds pretty cool.
Is that? Well, I think that's what he said. I need to have some context.
I think what happened is one hack reactor bought Maker Square a couple years ago, but they left this one called Maker Square. But then this year they decided to implement everything in that reactor.
So like I said,
Maker Square went in.
there's no pressure on time or whatever you can do is great.
No, but what it does is it forces me to push off consulting. So like I lower my consulting billable rate.
I'm talking about tonight.
Oh,
There's no pressure on time,
no.
shorter, longer, whatever.
Okay.
Even if we're shorter than normal, that'll just give us more time to socialize
I
and stuff.
can do a quick piece. Far enough along Phoenix stuff that I can give a preview. It's visual, so it wouldn't be like a,
You want to?
if we need it, just for variety. Otherwise,
And then running this node express and then top just a big cool project.
So these are other students. This would actually say like that was my segment.
When I was taking it, they were teaching that now they're teaching.
Yeah, it's live. So I can take a look. We're actually able to look inside of the classrooms. So like anybody using the editor, it's all multi-user. So you basically have full access. You basically drop in, and so you can actually measure everything. You can measure activity. You know, when people start homework, and it's different.
That's cool.
And that's kind of the presentation. I'm talking about the editors, the classroom. Like what is a digital classroom? It's not that you can like. It's not a shared desktop or.
Here, Wi-Fi.
Yeah, the dogs are some tough for me too.
What part is the Wi-Fi key?
Applied to jobs. Somehow I just. And one and then.
Does anyone else need Wi-Fi?
I'll miss you off.
They have these little business cards now for Wi-Fi. I don't know why. They don't shop everywhere.
Yeah, they're all different. Yeah, I just asked them.
Or, yeah, we're gonna use this one.
It might be.
It might be like limited access.
Yeah.
Okay.
Welcome everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. We have a little bit of a lighter group than normal. Part of it is probably the ed tech switch. So normally we're in the bigger room and normally we have kind of a bigger crowd. This month ed tech is putting on their event, so we sort of switched with them. So we'll have a little smaller crowd today, which is cool. Actually, are those name tags, are those ed tech?
Yeah,
Those
but
for the cluster?
oh yeah, but I sent it for this too.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I was just going to say for the ed tech folks. So our topic today is what I learned spending 200 hours teaching my daughter to code. I have good news and bad news. So bad news is that Jay actually is not here. He had a personal emergency come up today, unplanned. The good news is that Ted is actually, essentially, you could call yourself the CTO officially, or he's the CTO of that same company. He was already planning on doing a lightning talk, so he's just going to expand and do a full talk. So Ted's talk will be slightly more technical probably, but I'm sure he can still speak to a lot of the same challenges and so forth. It'll be a little less personal since Ted didn't build it for his daughter, like Jay was going to talk about, but hopefully it'll still be interesting to you. Obviously, since things have changed, if you guys don't find it interesting, we won't hurt our feelings if you switch rooms or whatever. Just wanted to, full disclosure, we did have that change. Normally, our meetup is Bleeding Edge Web, so normally we also start off with a Bleeding Edge Web segment where we talk about browsers and frameworks and stuff like that. We actually were skipping that this month because of the focus on sort of more of the educational side of things. So we were just going to jump right into announcements, and then I was going to let Ted take over from there. So thanks to Capital Factory, as usual, every month. They give us this space kindly. And actually, I really only had one event that I was going to talk about. There's the obvious stuff, like all the South by Southwest stuff that's coming up and all that. I was contacted by this conference, Squares Conference. They put it on up in Grapevine, which is near Dallas. It'll be in April. And they're offering a 15% off coupon code meetup. So if you think that might be interesting, it's kind of a general purpose design and development conference. It looked kind of interesting, so you might check it out and use the code if you are interested. And that's the record of the shortest time I've ever spoken, I think. So with that, I was going to turn it over to Ted. Ted's going to talk about kind of building the online classroom and some of the challenges involved in that.
Hey, Brian, before you do that,
Yeah.
there's people looking for work and hiring.
Oh yeah, that's true. Good call. So we do normally sort of open it up. If anyone is available for work, or if you're hiring, or any kind of announcements like that, or if you know of some event that other people might want to know about, anyone?
Yeah, so my name is Philippe Battler. I have a small company doing product comparison, and I'm looking for a contract person to do some React work front end. It's a pretty small project, about a month or so, maybe two. And I'm also looking for somebody to help me with the back end stuff. Somebody who would be, let's say, full stack, and same thing. This is maybe some re-engineering, but it's mostly DevOps. So maybe like 10, 15 hours a month.
Cool. So part-time and or short-term contract development, React, maybe some other stuff. Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, Tony McDowell with webworks.com. We're looking to hire someone for web app development, Python backend with, pretty complete JavaScript front end, and .NET, C#, XSL experience is a plus. So if you're interested, come see me later or send an email to careers@webworks.com.
Webworks.
Yeah, just like it
WORKS.
WEBWORKS.
Yeah, not WORX.
Right.
Web 2.0 style. Anything else? Yeah.
Looking for .NET and Angular 1 developers for a project in Austin. It's a long-term contract, so if you're available, please let me know. And then my company also hosts a conference called MVP Mix. It's coming up again in Dallas at the Addison Convention Center. We have a lot of great speakers flying in. Scott Hunter, the ASP.NET Core head at Microsoft, will be the keynote. So I have some discount codes for our workshops as well as our sessions today. So if you're interested, please let me know.
And we've actually got a guy who comes here, he's not here today, he's usually here, named Ryan, who has, I think, spoken at this conference before, and he's recommended it in the past. It's primarily Microsoft tech, right?
Yeah, but we promote all technologies.
Okay,
We have
so-
speakers coming in and covering the full spectrum.
Cool. So MVP Mix,
.com.
and you said you have discount
I do.
codes if anyone's interested?
Yes.
So see her, what was your name?
Allison.
Allison? Cool, anything else?
I got those too. I got a lot of contract stuff. Kind of I used to run a consulting firm, had a lot of stuff fall in my lap recently. So looking for Angular folks, React folks, Node people, C#.NET, and then general DevOps, primarily things like Docker, Jenkins, that type of stuff. Most of the roles that I have are anywhere from 6 to 12 months. Most of them are local, with a couple of exceptions down in San Antonio and one out in Boston. So if anybody is interested in contract work, let me know.
All right, what's a contract? Anything else?
Okay, well,
Yeah.
my name's Doug. I'm looking for work, and mostly JavaScript, up and down stack, and mostly React. Recently, although I'm pretty framework agnostic, but I will definitely touch base with you guys about React.
Good. After the
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I guess I should mention too, this is a little smaller crowd than normal, but I think we'll still, a couple of us at least, head over to Buffalo Billiards afterwards. So if anyone is interested in socializing or doing any more networking afterwards, we'll do that. Anything else? Any other announcements?
I guess I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to Python, Ruby, JavaScript, React, Angular 1. I could learn Angular 2 in probably a few weeks. So I've also done Backbone, but I don't know if anybody's doing that anymore. So
Yeah, I know of people who are reluctantly doing it. Yeah, so it sounds like maybe there's a couple of people here you could connect with. We should have time today after this, like to hang around here too, for those who might want to connect. And then, like I said, Buffalo Billiards after that, if we get kicked out. Anything else? Any other announcements? All right, I'm going to turn it over to Ted.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
So first off, on behalf of Jay, he called me this morning. He was not up for talking and was headed to the hospital, and he's fine, but he wanted to send his regards in terms of not being able to speak today. Jay's a pretty passionate individual, passionate about education, very passionate about kids' education, and stemming from his teaching his own daughter to him basically bootstrapping a startup, CodeWizards, focused on teaching kids to code and filling in the gaps that exist where coding is the new math. And it doesn't exist in the same way that math exists in schools. And our business is really to try to fill in that gap, to provide a service to parents, to allow after-school activities to kind of onboard people who are interested in coding, get them curious, get them to be able to build things and to not feel intimidated that they can't step in and do this as a career. It's a project for me that punches a lot of my buttons in terms of how I learned to code, and also, you know, how we interact. And I have seen the classes that go on a daily basis of students, and it's kind of awe-inspiring to see high school kids learning how to do what we do professionally on a daily basis, and learning it in a way where they're encouraged to go off and just build things. I've seen it in the videos, I've seen it in the classroom, and they're very proud of what they create. And knowing that's the future of work, or the future of a lot of work, it's something that we should be doing. And so this talk will dive a little bit into how I got involved in CodeWizards, what we actually built, why we built it, and kind of I can answer any types of questions as we go along about both the business and also the structure of how we're scaling and addressing the market. So I'll put it out there as a question, but if you think back, how did you start? I mean, like, at what point did you get interested enough to pursue software development? I mean, we can answer a question. You go ahead.
Was that a rhetorical or?
No, it's not a rhetorical question. I mean it genuinely. Like, everyone has their starting point.
For me, it was 1978. There was a teletype connected to the Huntington Beach Union High School District mainframe.
Okay.
And I got to learn BASIC when I was 13 years old, and yeah, it got me hooked.
Yeah. Yeah, that relates a lot. I don't know, anybody else? Go ahead.
Excel couldn't do what I wanted it to do, so
Yeah.
I was like, all right, code.
Yeah. That's perfect. Anyone else?
Well, I guess it's less about code, more about computers.
Yeah.
But I broke my dad's computer when I was little, so I had to, in a hurry, figure out how to fix it. That's how I got hooked. So.
That's pretty cool. Mine was at age 7, my mom signed me up for a class to go learn logo graphics on an Apple II after school at, after school in class. And I wouldn't leave. Like, I was, coding all sorts of lines and stuff. And she was like, "We got to go." And I was like, "No." And that proceeded, on to me identifying where all of the Apple II computers that I could go get time on in the neighborhood, and then going and making friends and basically kind of, I guess, infiltrating into the houses to be able to write software. And I would carry around disks and basically go program stuff until the point where my parents got tired of it and bought me an Apple. And from then on out, it's sort of nonstop. But how did I meet Jay? Now this was interesting because I went to the EdTech startup, the startup weekend. And I had an idea for a service that we were going to go build. I had a handful of folks that I was interested in building it with. We went to startup weekend thinking that we were going to do this great work. And at first, they sort of disqualified anybody who was bringing existing ideas into the startup weekend. And so we were really turned off. We were frustrated the first day. It was like ground zero. And so we started helping another team. And in the course of helping that other team, Stephen and I just said, "Damn it, let's go do this ourselves." So we hopped off and continued to work on our own thing. We ended up getting second in the startup weekend, out of all of it said and done. But midway through startup weekend, Jay was going from table to table, from team to team, and talking with the technical team members. And I recall very vividly, he was trying to understand whether folks had an interest in helping, in seeing if the group had an interest in teaching people to code. At the same time, I had a startup outside of that, which was focused on investment education. And Jay and I kind of hit it off in that regard. And for the past year and a half, we've actually been swapping hours. So Jay will actually do marketing work for me, and I will do coding work for Jay. And we've been swapping basically hours neutrally back and forth between companies. And I ended up writing all of his tech. And Jay and I are now close friends. We meet every Friday. We work on this project pretty passionately. And I'll be taking a role in CodeWizards, working on head of tech for them, ongoing. And so I kind of want to show you where we are. We started with a class of 1, Jay teaching his daughter. That is before this slide. The first stage was a class of 10 people. Jay created the curriculum, built everything from scratch, had a kind of a shared screen sharing environment, had everybody on a conference call, and he had built a curriculum, and they basically went through the curriculum. And through that experience, he learned a ton. He learned a ton about the idea of a classroom, of what the students actually needed to have to move forward. And that's different, because normally when I first heard of, digital classroom, you mean like a video player and somebody will do the video work and then you'll go maybe meet somewhere or take a quiz. And that's not Jay's version of digital classroom. It was a real class environment. It's the class you go attend and you take, and it's interactive. And nobody has to be in the same room, but everyone has to be in the same space. And so we started working on the concept of what is the digital classroom and how can we build that to support coding, code editing, code publishing, and basically measurement of all these things. And that has coalesced into kind of this big block of technology. Now, some of the problems we've addressed along the way are pretty interesting. So we started with 10, we went to 3 classes of 30, and then when we got to 3 classes of 30, we had some scalability issues. For one, I innocently thought, we can survive long enough on a single server with a single file system and just writing files to disk. That'll work just great. Well, that didn't work when we hit the end of this bar, and we all of a sudden, Jay had signed up close to 90 students. And we were headed into 90 students, 2 classes would go concurrently, and we were looking at a problem in terms of servicing that. So we had to build up the infrastructure to do N-scale on AWS. We wrote an EFS file system to basically do the file share so that both instances could attach to the same file system, and all files are backed up as they're edited. So you can live edit, and then when you hit save, it's published out on the web, and every student has their own domain on CodeWizards. And they have their little own root subdomain on CodeWizards. So when they publish files, they actually have a URL for every document they make. So there's ownership here that is the student owns a site, and the student is building and editing their class, their courseware in this file system environment, and that's what ends up being published out and shared. I'm going to show you the editor, I'm going to show you some of those things. But then, when we signed up all these students, we then had this tremendous attrition. And so for the past 6 months, we've focused on attrition, which is how do we keep students engaged, interest, how do we not let them fall behind? Because if they fall behind by 2 lessons, we're probably 70% sure they'll drop out of the class. And that was something like, okay, well, let's begin to measure and let's begin to refine and let's build eventing in to know when that occurs so that we can get proactive with parents about your student needs to come for makeup class, there's gaps that we need to fill back in, and that's become one of those core issues of how do we solve this. The student's not interested. Sometimes we actually found that their parents had kind of pushed them into the coding class and the student really didn't want to be there, and then it kind of started showing up in their work. They would skip homework assignments and it would come up, and that would lead to a pleasant conversation with the student and the parent, and it would just be like, yeah, this is, if you're not interested, it's totally okay. That's valid attrition. But sometimes it was they just miss an assignment, they get behind, they're now learning the P tag and they're supposed to know what the HTML or an attribute is, and they're just a lesson behind, and they need to be able to close that gap. And so they would feel at odds. They would tell their parents they didn't want to be in the class, so and so forth, but they would fall off. And for that, we've worked pretty hard on the attrition, but now we're at 185 students, and we're going into a growth segment where by the end of the year, our goals are to be at 1,000 students. And these classes are occurring all over the U.S. The students are not geographically bound in any way, shape, or form. They're time bound to be accountable in a classroom and online at a certain time. And they'll dial in to a common call. And then they'll basically do their classwork. But I'll take you through it. But it's kind of interesting seeing this through the growth, the problem we've solved, and what we've actually had to build, which were real problems that we ran into, versus the problems you think you might have. They're very different. And all the problems we ran into were just like, this is happening. How do we stop this? How do we mitigate this? How do we mitigate attrition? How do we onboard students to make them feel comfortable with the editor? How do we shorten the learning curve so that somebody can start, and this is easy enough to where they can start day one, they can use the editor completely and be able to build and publish their own files. So I think it sort of goes into, and this is really at the core of what Jay wanted to kind of focus on, but we believe that the digital classroom, the online classroom, needs to be teacher and instructor led. It's not a place devoid of somebody leading or teaching. It is a place that people need to be taught. And there needs to be accountability to that person. And also there needs to be interaction with that person so that you can get deeper into the subjects. There's lots of code camps and code things that you can go do and figure out online. But how many times do people actually finish them? And what's the retention of those when it really matters? Our goal is that in a teacher-led environment, we can get the quality much higher because students are measured, they're accountable, they're reported, they get reports back to parents, their work is published, and so they're vested in learning these skills, and it kind of it's self-reinforcing in that sense. So we want to have a very consistent schedule, being able to hit consistent dates on when classes are taught. And so in many classes, that kind of recurring theme is pretty important. So having it be scheduled, having time slots where students and teachers meet. There's no issue with logging in. Like logging in is a pretty smooth operation. And then once you're logged in, your presence is known, that you know who's in class and who's not, because we have a classroom that's actually connected. It's not a static classroom where you're logged in and you're waiting for everybody to start the conference call. When you log into the system, the instructor knows that you are there, and they know when you close the browser window, and they know when you edit a file, and they know when you do any type of work. And that's a little bit different because it's very, very measurable. We also wanted it to be a project-based approach. So everything you're doing is building something. You start at one state and you progress it to another state and you're done. And in the course of that, you're actually learning the content through that kind of project-led lesson. And so some of the work we've had to do was what constitutes a project? How does a student pull a project into their own work environment? Can they update that project after they've edited it? Can they reset it back to ground zero? Can they delete it and start anew? Can they skip ahead and basically get projects that are ahead of where they are and practice before a class about something they know nothing about? But really, it's also a hands-on classroom. We really wanted students to be actively typing in keyboards, editing content. And so The classroom is actually the creation of the project, and the instructor is troubleshooting the class. In many senses, it's kind of the goal of the next generation of classrooms where the teacher is not the class. The teacher is a bystander who is helping the class do better. And so this online classroom sort of sets up that type of model where the teacher's assistive to the classroom, not the directing the classroom or the leading the classroom. And we also wanted to make it fun. So throughout this, there's kind of a Harry Potter-ish, wizard-y kind of theme. There's fun colors, it's easy. The projects have kind of are theme-based, and it's anything but boring for what's being created. So in terms of the curriculum, we were able to kind of drive, it's more than branding, it's sort of just make things more interesting than, you know, H1 tags and P tags and anchors. So the classroom also gets a little interesting because the roles of the classroom change. And in this sense, we wanted to empower a student with ownership over their definition of the classroom. We wanted to give them a file system, and we wanted to give them ownership of it. Here's your file system. You're in charge of it. You're accountable for it. You edit it. And if you want to mark things as turned in, you can mark projects as turned in, and other people can come look at them. Not only that, but you can actually visit those pages online, and the student can initiate sharing with parents and other folks who basically want to show off their work. And we've seen that a lot, where students will basically have ownership, and they tend to contribute a lot deeper to the projects themselves.
Got a question online.
Yep.
If you guys are trying to keep the age range in each class close together, it's kind of demographic.
Yeah, I believe the demographic is really middle school, high school coding education. And it's, I think right now that's the target, but we're introducing other courses that vary that, such that there's a kind of an introduction to programming, there's JavaScript, we're looking at Python, we're looking at HTML, we're looking at CSS, we're looking at jQuery, we're looking at tech to sort of understand how things work, and then have classes where you can go start in one area. If you have an interest, you can keep going, or you can hop over and learn something new. And that's one of the challenges too, is how do we define the classroom or the file system to work against the new courseware that's incoming? And I think that's going to be not necessarily a challenge, it's probably one of the more fun problems I'm looking forward to kind of figuring out, is how do we do server-side development on a file system where the student has access to the server and they can publish documents. I mean, what's the security surface of that? You know, what do you do and not do? I don't want to give them access to the file I/O. Like that terrifies me, etc. So, but going on, we also wanted to be project-based. So projects in this sense are folders on a file system. How do you create them? How do you edit them? How do you copy them? How can you clone them? Can you make iterations of a project? Can you do things 3 times and just try it out and then basically revert that file system back to what it was originally? These are all things we try to figure out, because when you give a file system ownership, you want them to do whatever they want to with that file system. Change it, destroy it, change it, do whatever you want.
Do you do any sort of version control with that, or?
There really isn't any version control. And the reason is we want to give a sense of ownership. Like, we really want somebody to feel like this is yours, this is your site, you control it. When you check in assignments, you know they're graded within a window, and then after they're graded, your grades are published. So if you want to go delete that stuff after you're graded, great, it's your area. And versioning did come up. We had kind of a roundabout idea of, you know, how do we merge this in with GitHub so everybody has a GitHub account and everything's published back to GitHub, and there's kind of this virtuous cycle of repos. But, you know, version control is not a simple subject. Files and folders are hard enough, but teaching them, you know, a 3D file system in time is not something that, you know, middle school, high school students. I'm pretty sure they could get it. They could do it. But do we want that now to be a barrier to entry to the classroom? Like, oh, you have to now know Git to get here. It's like, no, we want somebody to just step into the editor, type, save, yay, wow, you published something. That's the kind of experience we wanted. And I think the tech choices show that. It's like we didn't want a barrier to anybody getting involved in doing this. We wanted to try to lower the amount of technical knowledge you needed to do to have it. The second and third point are pretty important. We wanted the whole classroom to be measurable. So your activity's measured. And it's not an Orwellian thing, but it's more, we wanted to be able to know that, hey, you know, we saw somebody have activity in this time window. They were probably doing their homework. After class has let out, there's been no activity until the time before, and there's been no homework assignment turned in. You know, on the Wednesday before, I could send you an email and say your homework assignment has not been turned in, and I show no activity. That database query is pretty easy to do. And that's what we did. We basically set up to basically put in place eventing such that we can actually email parent and student and tell them that, hey, your homework assignment hasn't been turned in and it's due, you know, in 2 days. And so it's work that Jay and I don't have to do, but it's automation that sets up because everything is measured. And in that sense, you know, we're kind of a closed environment that we're only communicating with parents and students. We're not dealing with administrators or I'll say the intricacies, because this is sort of a private venture. That aspect doesn't get into who we communicate or how we communicate. So we can automate some things and do things a little bit differently. The other piece of it that's interesting is you actually turn in your quiz assignments in the classroom. So there's just a quiz tab. You take the quiz tab, you take the quiz after class, you turn it in. Because you're present in the editor, the teacher can actually see you in the edit screen, and they're one click away from checking you in as being attended for the class. So your being present in the online classroom as presence basically registers to show that you've been in attendance for the class, and thus, you know, you have accountability for that class. You were there. And we mark you as there. We mark you as finishing your homework assignment, and we mark you, finishing the quiz, and then turning in the homework assignment. And all the measurement of all those issues really add up for us to know whether a student or students are going to attrition out of the course. All of that sort of reinforces keeping them on the course schedule of learning and keeps them from falling into a gap and missing out on a potential lesson or missing a class or being able to make it up. So the editor. So this is the classroom. It really is, it's a text editor. And in terms of how it works, you have a file system. It's a standard tree. And there's folders in that tree. You can open them up. You can upload images. You can create HTML files and CSS files. You'll soon be able to create Python files, PHP files, and a handful of other things. And then each of those files actually correlates to your base directory. So my account is ted@CodeWizardsHQ.com. I go to CodeWizards.HQ. It will load the HTML file that is in the root of my application. There it is right there. It'll load that one. It'll actually render it out on the server. So I control my site. And I control my account, and it has my name on it, and I feel like this is mine. And in that sense, it gives the student a great start to say, the first day of class, everybody gets a site. And then, not only that, but the first thing you're going to do is you're going to customize your site to be yours. And so you go through learning the editor. And learning the editor is pretty easy because you simply click on a file, we load an editor, and then there's a giant save button. And we determine whether the state of the text has changed such that we know exactly when you've made an edit. And if you've made an edit, we can basically highlight those. And so there's some level of interaction. There's some other interesting buttons in here that are not like that. So this would be visit this page on the web. So it would open the browser to this URL. You can actually mark this as complete. So you can actually turn in your assignments in the editor. So when you have a file selected and you press on the pencil, it'll actually say, would you like to turn this in for assignment 3? You check which assignment you're in, and you basically hit done. And now the teacher has this recorded as a list of URLs that they'll grade to see whether you've done, you've qualified for the assessment. And so you can actually turn in your homework, you can edit your homework and turn in your homework. And you can also raise your hand. So if you have a question, you can basically say, I have a question, you can press the question mark. And that simply sends a message to the teacher. The teacher's monitoring, they'll get an event. They can see the event and they monitor the event panel. Also, they can say they're done. So a student's done, they can basically press done, and they can be instructed to go on to do a more advanced item, or they can basically wait till the rest of the class comes up. So a lot of the things that occur inside of a normal classroom, a physical classroom, can happen on an online classroom if the editor has presence and you can do things. Just to make sure we're clear, I have the editor. This is my account. So I created a folder, Bleeding Edge Web. I can go in it and load the file, and I can just say New Edit.
Command plus it a couple times.
What is it?
Command plus it a couple of times. Zoom.
Oh, yeah. Command plus. See? Whew, I did a good job with my HTML. And then I can hit save. And what essentially happens is I get, I've published my page and it's up and I've changed it. It's edited. And so the student has real accountability over what they're doing. They're very proud of their pages. We've seen a lot of sharing across both Facebook, Twitter, email, and text. They love sharing their pages, the things they've made. They're proud of their work, which is so cool. From a student wanting to share their technology, they basically share their own pages, and people end up sharing them to kind of show what they're doing and how they're progressing in the class. The other piece is interesting is the tech we actually built for projects. So you can go in and you can actually open up the editor and you can say, I want CSS Basics number 5, and I want to add the project, and it essentially clones that directory into your file system, and you can basically go in and you'll get the Swiss with CSS, and so here's the top 10 places to see in Switzerland, and they'll go through this, but they want you to take these photographs and integrate them into this application. So how would you do that? So you have to have the concept of, I have to have the concept of file paths, and I have to have the concept of the URL, and I have to have know the image tag and the source property, and also the attributes to basically size and basically set widths on those items. So you can see how a lesson goes. It's as simple as I make a copy of the project files, I go in, I make edits in a classroom environment, instructor-led, and at the end, I raise my hand, I publish, I'm done, and you go through the process. And that's sort of our version of the classroom. What's interesting is from the teacher side, we wrote tech to basically show who's doing what. So this is the behind-the-scenes teacher system that lets you see inside of the editor. So as you basically do things in the editor, you're calling APIs on the server. That server is putting it in a database, and it's also sending eventing in to basically doing WebSockets back to this UI. And so we get real-time, no refresh updates of any time anybody does any work. And one of the cool things that I noticed is you can see the files that I've opened. So I can open the files that Ted opened right here, and I can see their actual HTML. So as I'm teaching a student, you need an H1 after the P tag. I can see a save occur. I'll go back to the editor. I'll make a small change and hit save. But in the teach environment, it'll now show me exactly what was saved, what file was saved, what was opened, the user navigated, and I can filter those events down to say, I only want to see when Ted raises their hand, and I'll show you if I'm done, or I have a question, and so Ted is done and Ted needs help. And so you can actually see these events, and when classes are going, you can restrict the students down to just your class, and you can get a pretty good snapshot of what's occurring. And you can also have two classrooms going at the same time with two teachers, same UI, looking at different things, but they're seeing just the events that mattered to their classroom. And that helps the teacher have context of the real classroom, but they have context digitally with all the edits and all the changes that students are doing. They know who's making edits, they know who's not working, they know who's not saving stuff, they know who's doing the files and doing well, and they can actually go in and they can provide attendance to those. They can say which session is being edited, and they can also do behavioral things. If somebody's misbehaving on the phone, they can basically track that. They can mark it down in the class and follow through with how students are actually doing it. They can also go through and see how quizzes are done. They can see practice projects, and they can also generate reports for classes as to how well students have done in the existing class, but over the course of the class period, both in terms of behavior, attendance, and the like. And this is real handy because you can open this up and in 2 seconds have an email off to a parent if there's an issue, if there's an ongoing persistent issue from class to class, and also address that kind of attrition issue that we've been working hard to kind of address. Let me see. Additionally, we went in and wrote, standard admins for doing standard basic database editing. How do you create new accounts for students? How do you create new classes? How do you create new curriculum? How do you put everything online? How do you manage all that file system stuff? This is the admin that does it. Couple clicks and you basically can add classes, quizzes, students, new classrooms, new teachers, and all that accounts. You can basically just kind of deal with it here from a permissioning and editing point of view. I'll show you. You can go in and edit my. You can go in and edit my account as needed, and the like. And from a student perspective, they have video files. So every classroom has a video file. After the classroom is done, the recorded class is uploaded. So a student can come in after they've missed a class and basically pull it up inside the editor and watch the class. They can hit pause, go back to the editor, follow along, go back, and replay some of the class material. So they can actually do catch up in terms of class by using video files of a recorded class. They can basically do makeup. In terms of progress, we have both quizzes and practice projects. So practice projects are the file systems that you turn in. Quizzes are small quizzes that you take for various things. What does the term syntax mean when coding? The rules of the computer language. It's simple multiple choice quizzes. They take them, they know the score. If the student wants it reset, the teacher can reset it and the student can take it again. It's sort of loose that way, but it allows students to be accountable to the system. And we also publish the attendance back, and we also publish the behavior back. Anything that's stored in the students, published back to the student. If a teacher or parent logs in, they can see everything from the editor that we see. It's all there. There's nothing kind of hidden. But it keeps everybody accountable, and it keeps everybody engaged. And we found over time it has addressed this ongoing kind of attrition, interest, keeping students engaged, keeping them on the curriculum, not letting them get too far from deviating off course. So I showed you the editor. I showed you the quizzes and the progress related items. I showed you the admin. So this is the teaching tool set that we do for real-time data sharing and actually doing this. And also all of our admin related code base. So, I mean, technically, you guys know how biased I am about certain web tech. We wrote everything in here, in PHP. So all the backend is in PHP. I mean, everything from soup to nuts. And all of the UI is in Vue.js. I mean, and I really wouldn't do it any other way. That's me being biased. But I'm the only one managing this tech. And so I'm accountable to the code bases, and I know how to manage it. All of these tools are in version 1.1 of Vue. They haven't been migrated to 2.0 for no particular reason other than they just continue to work and there's nothing wrong with them, so we keep plugging away with it. If we find a valid reason that we need to move to 2, like making everything twice as fast, then we'll do it. But right now, it's more than enough for any student and more than enough for us in terms of file size and loading, and it's productive in terms of the work environment. Every project we have has a defined build process, and then we have a unified publish process where each project builds, and then we basically do a full build and we full deploy and publish. Yeah, question?
Just curious, because I thought you were a Python guy, right?
I do a lot of Python and a lot of Node.
Just curious about the PHP thing. And then also, did you use a framework in PHP?
No, so in PHP, it's kind of a long story. You know, Jay initially came to me and said, do you know Node.js? I was like, well, you know, I know Node.js, but why do you want to use Node.js? And it's like, well, it's the latest and greatest. And I'm like, well, it's the latest and greatest, but it has an ecosystem that at the time, a year and a half ago, hadn't quite gotten all the corners weren't rounded. Let me say that. And there's you could get a lot of splinters in using it too early. And so we went through a process of trying to understand, well, what do you have now? It was like, well, we use WordPress. And I'm like, well, why don't we just use PHP? Because your host that you already have uses it, supported it, loves it. It just works. And so we'll basically bridge off of that. We didn't use a framework per se with PHP. We wrote, I wrote, it's basically a regular expression when it comes into Nginx. It basically routes to a single index.php file, and that single PHP file does all of the routing and URLs. So it's standard web tech, but in this case, we're allowing the editing of those files and that API to be bridged in, and it basically manages that file system. Initially, we had the file system locally, and so we were doing file edits, and then we went through a process of actually moving it onto EFS, and EFS is Amazon's NFS file share, for better terms of the technology. But it's a file share that each instance of the web app can basically create a local share, and then it writes to the local share, but it ends up creating network traffic to write to a single file system. That file system is backed up on a regular basis, and so anytime students make changes, they basically consolidate back. So even though it's a multi-tiered web front end, we basically have a shared file system or an EFS instance that's shared across that. And then we have a database that's shared amongst all the instances. So right now we run 2 instances at AWS on, what's the name of the service? Beanstalk is the standard. And we run one of the standard, we let Amazon manage the security on basically the image that we're using in terms of PHP, and we basically migrate with that. And we have a set of tests that we run to basically see compatibility, whether any of the file system APIs have changed or any of those. But we've had really good luck with it. It's been just solid. I mean, for all the bad that people apply to PHP, it's really how you use it. It's amazing tech. It's been used in an amazing way at both Facebook and Yahoo. It's been proven to an nth degree. It's really solid. And if you need to do something out of the box, it is there and it's done. And there's always somebody who knows how to make it work if you can't figure it out yourself. And there's good docs. So in that sense, I can't label it a bad technology. but I'd label it one that we've gotten a long way by applying that, because it's probably the most mature server-side programming language, procedural programming language out there. If you want to do different slants of it, there's different stuff. But I mean, I've done all sorts of stuff, from Python to PHP to current projects in C, which is driving me nuts. But outside of that, are there any questions about what we built, how we built it? I really want to open it up for questions. Go ahead.
So, did you leverage any existing virtual classroom software like Citrix or
Zero.
Google Classroom?
Zero.
So you wrote everything from scratch?
Yes.
Was there a reason why you didn't leverage anything out there?
The reason we didn't leverage anything out there, I'd probably say one is licensing. Well, I'd say one is flexibility and control. Two is licensing cost. We're a small startup. And three, to be able to move fast, we needed to control our own tech. And to do that, I didn't want to have to edit somebody else's source or have something else get in the way of us being successful. So I found dependencies to be a problem, and I think we've managed our dependencies very well in terms of what we're dependent on. The code editor we're dependent on is a very well-known, it's probably the leading code editor. If you've used any online editor, you've used the same tool set.
Which one are you using?
You know,
Is it Ace or CodeMirror?
It's CodeMirror. Yeah. CodeMirror is just exceptional. It's the same one that Adobe chose to use in brackets, and it's also been used in some other projects, but enough energy has gone into it that any type of feature or function you need in a code editor is there, and it just does it. And usually you're just dealing with configuration, not writing small code to make things work. So that component works really well. All you have to do is just feed it source code, done, get out of the way, it'll work. It'll format JavaScript or HTML, or it'll know how to syntax highlight it. It'll know how to do coding hints, tabbing, etc. Yeah, question?
Yeah, I'm curious, is the focus all individual, or is there any group project type stuff? Any collaborative stuff?
So the question is there any type of collaborative
Between the
items?
students?
You know, there really isn't, because we don't know if the students are sitting adjacent to one another or if the students might be 300 miles away. We really just don't know. On some classes, they do after schools in a computer lab, and on some classes, each student is in a separate location. And by separate location, they can be as far away as, you know, Chicago and close as, you know, just west of Austin. But it kind of varies, and it's going to get more diverse in that respect, because what we're seeing school districts. We're basically going in, licensing a school district, going to a school, and the licensing from a school district point of view is interesting because the school approves it for after school use, and then the student body gets access to it. Now they could actually go on site and have a room dedicated for the class, or they can go home and do the work just as well. It really doesn't matter. It's just that all students have to be accountable to be online and on a call at that particular time. Whether they're in the same room or not is different. And we have seen cases, which is really fascinating, we have seen cases where the actual online students that are separated are actually potentially better environments because there is no communication. There is no, hey, what's going on? You know, like, there's no, what are you doing? Like, play with somebody else's computer, or they can horse around. Sometimes there's a monitor, but the monitor's not plugged into the class environment. They're just trying to keep the classroom going, but the online teacher can't control the local behavior. And so but you can see it actually in the metrics in the editors and in the behavior, and you can hear it on the calls and in the classrooms. You know what's going on. And you can begin to identify it, and the monitor can begin to identify it. But I sort of see the next step is we're probably going to see a more distributed classroom, not a local kind of focused class. Yeah, there was a question here.
So the teacher-student view, how do you handle, in your example, you were the one logged in, but
Yeah.
if there's 10 or 20 questions at once, how is the queuing handled?
So the question is, how is the queuing handled? So what we have is, we didn't want to create a situation where the student was attached to the multi-user server. So the way it actually works is the student sends API messages to the API. The API sends messages to the multi-user server, and only the teachers are on the multi-user environment. Now, there's a lot you can get away with in that architecture, because it sort of enables the teachers to have the view they need. But if there's 2 teachers logged in and they've segmented their messages to just this class, they only see events for that class. All the events go over the wire, but there's only 2 teachers, and the bandwidth of how many students are going at once, I'm pretty sure there'll be a threshold when we have so many people editing that now we have to re-architect the system, but that's not a today problem, that's probably a tomorrow problem. That's a good one for me to put on the list of things we probably need to take a deeper look at when it matters. But you know, we're focused on, is it working now? Do we see a tidal wave coming that's going to disrupt that? No, we've got other things to go do, and so we're having to kind of prioritize tech that way. Yeah, question.
So most online classes, the students see a video of the instructor. Do you have that, or
we don't?
What were your thinking about that, or just?
Well, you know, I think we kind of went over it. The problem with it is that their work becomes secondary to the watching of television. And it's sort of a different medium, right? You have this, I'm able to listen to someone talking and do something else. But as soon as I'm asked to both visually and audio cue into a small box, I've kind of lost the ability to do the editing. You have to take your eyes off of the visual to be able to type and cue in. So if that's not there, what happens? Like, what's the balance? And I think the balance is the student ends up focusing more on their canvas and their work, and they're listening to the things. Plus, the teacher can see what the student is doing in the editor. So now we have a whole different dimension that, you know, that box, the box can't see back. The teacher can't see the student. But in this case, we can see the student because of the work changes that they're doing. Even to the point where you can see everybody in the class check in, and you don't see Bob check in. And you can actually ask the question, Bob, how are you doing? You know, and all of a sudden it's like, you know, the teacher's honed in on the student, but everybody else in the class can be potentially busy. So it's kind of I don't know how to describe it. I've heard it described as an inverted classroom as a teaching model, but that's kind of one of the things we're trying to get to is that the teacher is there to assist. The teacher's not there to lead. They're there to assist each tech. Now, do we have audio tech where we could tie in directly to the student? Not yet. It's kind of group audio. But you know, it's early days. There's a lot of new stuff coming in the web stack to be able to do those. Especially, you know, if we ended up cracking open, hey, create a Chrome shell and basically use the audio stack that is in Chrome, you could go direct one-on-one, and the teacher could basically say, Tom, mutes everybody else. They're talking one-on-one to a student. One-on-one could be video. Turn it off. I'm back multi. So that's definitely possible, but you'd have to get the client stack unified to be able to do that type of technology jump. But it is possible. Most of the tech that's in Chrome can be done to use multi-user, multi-person. Yeah, question. Yeah.
I was wondering what kind of projects are the students working on?
So the question is, what sort of projects are the students working on? I'm sure the students would be horrified that I'm going to do this. But as we've actually been working in here, there have actually been a whole bunch of student saves. So there's actually students working. So Ryan is not me. That is another student here. Let me actually So I can actually see basically the code work that they've done. And Isabel was working on an interesting one. This is one of the assignments, which is, have you seen this dragon? You know, it's a wanted poster, and they have to put together the wanted poster and they have to edit it. And so they're basically going through editing this, setting borders, you know, placing an image, putting borders around the image, and they're having to learn tags by doing these small projects. I can go in, there's some other ones as well. So this is, you know, it's basically going through, it's kind of a Wikipedia entry of the Taj Mahal. It starts out as simple text, and you have to mark the text up to become basically a rich page. You have to change the background color and other things. And so in a sense, they vary widely in how they're used or what the subject matter is, but really it's about learning the tags and markup from here's my plain vanilla version to here's my finished deliverable. Actually, you probably see some of them on mine. Everybody has a default homepage that they start out with. I don't think I've edited mine in any way. No, I have edited mine. Yeah, question.
Yeah,
sorry.
Sure. One.
Yeah.
Okay. Do they have a final project? I mean, when it comes to final show that, how are the final project, are they graded, like criteria, what kind of criteria are they graded on? Like, are there critiques?
Yeah, so the question is what kind of, what are they graded on in terms of the end project? When the student turns in their practice projects, they're graded on the subject of that class. Typically, they will have learned 2 or 3 tags. Those tags or attributes will be required to be used. They'll need to understand the context of them, how they're used. They will need to have successfully used them, applied them, potentially in a creative way, or done something. The grading is really on a 5 scale, 4 being mastery, and 5 being, hey, you really did awesome. Like, this is out of the box of this is more than we expected. I mean, again, these are kids, and they're doing this from an extracurricular activity. So the grading for us is, it's 2-sided. One, it's to keep them accountable and to make them feel very good about the validation that they finished something, that they're indeed moving through the course and they're being successful. But, again, it's extracurricular. It's not like, we don't get grades in soccer, after school soccer. So in that sense, like, we just wanted to keep them on the curriculum. So I think that's more attuned to it. Yeah, question.
How quickly are they progressing through, like, HTML? Are they, I guess, between going from just the basic setup of an HTML document to inputs and forms and stuff like that, like, how fast are they moving through what they're learning?
Each classroom presents a different topic, and the topics go all the way through forms and controls and being able to create those types of screen elements. For the HTML, it is learning the concepts of tags. The course builds on itself in that, you have to learn what an element is, you have to learn about attributes, and then the next set is, well, okay, let's make a p tag. What's a p tag? What's an h1? And you go through those, and then, hey, what about sets of tags? What are tables? What are dependent rows? And then, what are forms? What are controls? And the like. I stay a step back from the curriculum, although I love looking at it because it's kind of my work. So I love looking and seeing what's going on. But the deliverables are non-trivial working HTML pages by the time you're done. This is not, with not a lot more, these guys could be doing the base HTML layout for some of the projects that we work on a regular basis. It wouldn't take much, but it's just a question of, you know, they're progressing through it, but they're learning. We're trying to get them interested in the medium, not necessarily the core tech. It's kind of like, I mean, I learned Logo. I haven't used Logo at any point in my career, but I learned it as a kid, and I love learning it. And I got fascinated with learning it and how it worked. And that kind of led to a fascination with computers in general. I chose not to do it in college because I thought you know, I enjoyed it so much. I didn't want to do it as a job because I wanted it to be fun as a hobby. And when there weren't any jobs in environmental engineering, I started programming. And because I knew how to program before, so it's kind of like I didn't plan my technical career, but you know, I had it before I did engineering school, which is kind of fascinating to think that it kind of goes back to my mom signing me up for this Logo course, that now I'm fascinated with computers, and then I work on computers for 10 plus years, and then I find myself doing it, you know, after that as a full-time job. But I think that's how it happens for most people. I mean, I really do. I think there's some event that kind of triggers you to say, I can do this, I can learn this. Wow, it isn't, wow, I can learn that, I can do that, I just need to apply myself. And then you apply yourself a little bit, and soon you're running, and you're doing it, and it's normal. And so the earlier we can get kids doing that, I think the better for, you know, the next generation of folks. I mean, I'm pretty sure this tech is going to be an antique by the time they get to the job market. But that's true with all tech. All tech just keeps reinventing itself over and over and over and over and over again. I can't tell you how many JavaScript frameworks I've been through. Sorry. Questions? Anything anybody else? Yeah.
So when Python comes, and I think we all have the potential for bias, mine's testing, I'm a tester by trade.
Yeah.
Will there be any types of extra credit for unit tests? So you've got the basic Python procedural code, but for that person that wants to just do a little bit more, they now test all their classes, etc.
Yeah, you know, I'm having, this is Ted, I'm in charge of the technical CTO stuff. I need to make sure the systems work and are always up. And then there's, I know this curriculum stuff and I'm interested in it, but it's not my area.
Okay.
I mean, I definitely have opinions. I don't express them. I stay neutral because the curriculum is done by an excellent professional group that just is focused on teaching and how to build concept to concept and bridge those concepts. I mean, creating teaching curriculum is really hard. I mean, it's unbelievably complex, especially with technical subjects where you're having to bridge from technical subject to technical subject. How do you know that somebody doesn't know what a variable is? Now all of a sudden you're talking about a class instance. You know, like, have they gone through OOP? Do you know what a property is? Is this a closed function? What's the scope? You know, like, these subjects compound so fast that you have to navigate your way through learning them in a way that lets them layer up. And then you go back and say, oh, by the way, this thing you thought you knew what it was, well, it was really an object and it was created from this. And you begin, you know, that's how you layer things up. So would we apply testing to it? I don't see people learning it going that way. They probably learn testing at some point in the more advanced areas, but I don't think, I mean, I don't know. We could get asked to do courses on who knows what or who knows who, and we might have to cover Python testing, but I don't know. I'm gonna stay focused on this technical area because I like doing this side and I love that it supports this side, but this isn't my area, if that makes sense. It's me dodging the question, makes sense. Yeah,
I'm sorry, I keep hitting you with curriculum questions, but
yeah.
Do you see though the approach to this kind of virtual learning to other subjects like algebra? I mean, I know this is specifically for teaching coding, but I mean, I guess it seems like there's applications for other.
Yeah, I think there's applications because you need to have a couple things. I mean, the online classroom being measured is unbelievably powerful, right? You have this, the entire classroom is, you know every footstep a user takes through it and every path they do. Not that you're gonna rifle through all of that behavior, but you can see how things come to be. You can give somebody a sense of ownership. I mean, I could see a medium where you were shaping formula or using Excel like this. You know, if I had a file system where I could open up Excel documents and do it. And I think Google's pretty well versed. Their multi-user does tie in to this type of thing. So, and they're widely used in education, both the writing, the online editor tool sets for them. But in this case, we're doing code editing, so it's similar, but it's potentially different. I mean, I don't know how we span. I mean, I'm concerned about how we're going to span over to server-side languages and teaching, and how we're going to VM that type of stuff. How do we get it to actually run online? Because I don't want it to run on our hardware. I'd like it to run on a VM that can crash and break, and they can erase that file system, and it'll just blow up, and it'll get reset after they do it. And we don't have to. I don't have to worry about it. I can sleep at night, knowing that they're crashing a virtual computer, not the server they think they're editing. So I don't know. It's a tough problem. I mean, I'm sure you can apply the digital classroom to a lot of different things, but the core tenets that were up here, you know, measurable. Is there presence to it? Do you own it? Do you have ownership? Do you have? Can you meld it? I think those things are really cool. I mean, because that's a whole new area.
I think the prospect of analyzing, you know, the metadata that the students are generating to maybe even project out future issues that they're long before they're really struggling. I mean.
Oh yeah, big time. No, I mean you can see the behaviors of what students are doing. You know who's done their homework. I mean, you can't tell who's done their homework in a standard class. And they could be out copying other students' homework outside of the class and you wouldn't know it. But here, you know they've done their work. You know they've logged in. You know they spent time doing it. You could probably capture the progressions of the steps they took to lead up to the end result. I could validate when they did it. I could validate, you know, I could run all sorts of metrics to do that. But you know, we're after school curriculum. But that's kind of why it's kind of cool to talk about this, because this could be kind of a gateway to doing that. You know, if we license the platform, what happens to schools? And then they have the medium. What do they do with that? But it's pretty cool because you can learn from it. Or if the quizzes are all in it, and you don't have to go anywhere to turn in your homework. You don't have to go anywhere else to turn in your homework, to grade the homework. I mean, all the quizzes are self-grading. When you finish taking them, you show you your score. Your score is done. It's like there. There's no grading. The teacher doesn't even have to look at it. It's just graded. As soon as you press complete, it's done. And the scores are registered. And if you want to try again, the teacher just wipes the score off, and you're free to go try it again. So in that sense, you know, there is a lot of things there that are neat because you can measure it. And it eliminates and makes the teacher more, well, lets the teacher focus on teaching versus administration, which I think is a really cool thing. You know, like it lets you focus on the craft of teaching, not the burden of teaching, which is pretty neat. Yeah, question.
Okay, how will you approach, let's say, the education department, head of education, to convince them to use or incorporate your system? I mean,
so how would we approach, you know, a head of an administration? Thankfully, I will never do that. And I'm so glad I don't have to go to those meetings, because I can tell you how it works. I know exactly why it works the way it works. I know all the details in it. If somebody asked me, you know, in question, can we do this? I can tell you, and I can give you a delivery date for when that'll be done. But how we get folks to take this, marketing and sales is not my bag. I'll be the first to tell you it's just not my bag. It's not, I don't understand that dynamic of business, but I do understand tech delivery of what needs to be there and why, requirements and timelines and deadlines. I can get that. I've done that for a long time.
Okay. Suppose they give you, let's say you have a representative give you a green light to go, they distribute the system. How will it be distributed? I mean,
well,
technically speaking.
right now we have a single file system image that is published to AWS, and we have peripheral services that are scripted to launch when that image goes live. If I take that image and I clone it, and I basically clone the database instance attached to it, I would have a parallel instance. And it would be totally independent from the prior one. And I could zero the user base over here, and I have new logins, and I just have to put a new URL and new domain name on it. So we have the platform ability from the fact that we wrote it that way. We wrote a single file system, we deploy it in scale, and we have dependent services that are there. The services being EFS, RDS, and there's also the email service, SES. Those are the three services. But we use Amazon and Amazon services to do all those call outs and all those things just because it just works. And if we have to create another environment, I can create a test environment. I can spin it up. Cost me $1.50 to spin up a brand new environment and have it running for 2 days. And then I can basically tear it down, take all the code, put it into production, and deploy it, and it's good. So it's really handy to use the cloud that way. And we found it to be very easy to get up, edit, and go. Anything else? Last question.
I was curious, what are the prerequisites for your students?
What are the prerequisites for our students? I don't believe there are any. I believe you have to have an interest in computers and interest in the subject. If you don't have an interest in the subject, then you probably are going to attrition out of the class because we've seen a lot of parents push kids in thinking, yeah, you need to learn how to code, and the students just are like, I don't want to do this, and they don't complete the material, and they attrition out of the class. But if the student is interested in it, they'll go all the way through, and they'll finish 3 classes in a row. And
they don't need to know anything about math or about.
No, pretty awesome, isn't it? No, I mean, you don't have to know anything about it. That's true for technology. You just, I watch my 4-year-old navigate an iPad, and she has never gone to an iPad class. She has no clue. She will use that thing better than anybody in our house. That's not working. The Wi-Fi's down, Dad. Okay, thanks.
Again,
the Wi-Fi's down. Disney Junior doesn't work, Dad. The Wi-Fi's down. She knows. Actually, we've gotten kind of funny. We're able to turn off the house Wi-Fi, and all of a sudden, all the kids will come to the kitchen. It's not working. It's like it's dinner time.
And
terrible parenting. But anyway, hey, thank you for your time. I'm terribly sorry that Jay couldn't make it. I know he was very disappointed for having him come down ill this morning. But on behalf of CodeWizards and the work we're doing, thank you for coming tonight. And if you want to reach out, I know Jay was looking to have a promotion for anyone who's interested in getting anyone in middle school or high school into a class. If there's any interest, please make contact with me and I will put you in touch. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted. If you guys just have 4 more minutes, actually, this is something that came up a few weeks ago that I was thinking about mentioning, and then it sort of ties in actually to Ted's presentation. How many people here are not developers? A couple people. Of the developers here, how many would consider themselves not super visual UI, like struggle with making nice looking front end stuff? So this is kind of a cool resource for non-technical and technical people alike who are not designers. It's called Web Design in 4 Minutes. And if you happen to be on Slack, I'll paste the link in Slack. I can give it later if anyone's interested. But I actually wanted to show you guys. So this is the concept. This is the actual page you start on. And what's kind of cool is you click on it, and then he basically leads you step by step and explains, okay, start with content, and then maybe add a little padding. And as you kind of click through it, it's the actual page you're looking at changes. So he talks about color and contrast. Click on the next thing, balance, identity. And what's kind of cool is it's walking you through sort of design fundamentals, but it's walking you through it step by step and showing you the actual rules. So as a developer, you should be able to see the CSS and sort of understand more or less what's going on. But it's kind of cool, and as you just click through it, by the end of it, I don't know what happened there. I think it's not working too well on this display, but oh, I clicked on the wrong thing, actually, sorry. And so by the end of it, you have this whole page with like the nice fancy header, kind of a nice looking layout, blocks of code, all that kind of stuff. And it's literally the exact same page that started out like this with just some CSS and content applied to it. So it's kind of interesting. So if it's like literally 4 minutes to just go through it, and then maybe if you spent an extra 10 minutes actually absorbing it, I think, most of us could learn a little bit from it. Just sort of, without having to go find a template, you can actually make a page that looks halfway decent if you just spend a few minutes working on it. So that just kind of rang that bell for me when I was watching Ted, because he's talking about building HTML pages and sort of walking through it step by step. So that kind of reminded me of this. The other thing I wanted to just mention is I'm also on the older side. I'm not calling you old, but I think you and I are like, same generation.
Easy.
So my entry into coding, back when I was a kid was kind of very similar, pre-internet and all that. So I had a computer, but back then, there was no network, there was no internet. So it's like you either pretty much could buy a game or you could try to make your own game. Those were the two options, right, if you had a computer. And so I would get on my bike, ride down like a mile to the public library, check out books on coding, bring them home. This was basic for me. And like just type them in from library books, like type it in, try to run it, would not work, try it again until it finally worked, right? And I was probably 7, 8, 9 years old at that time. And what's funny is I was going through some old papers at one point, and I found a thing. I think it was when I was going into high school, into 9th grade, and I had to fill out a form for the guidance counselor. And one of the questions was, what do you want to be, when you grow up or whatever? And I actually wrote computer programmer. I was 13 years old. But like Ted, when I got to college, I was kind of like, this isn't really that fun. It's kind of hard. I think I'm going to play basketball and do other stuff, worry about the job thing later. And then one thing led to another, and I ended up working in programming. Probably a similar story to a lot of you guys. But I just thought I would share that. Any final comments before we kind of wrap it up? Anyone? Oh, one thing, so they have these little, if you parked in the building, they have these little parking validation cards. Don't forget to pick that up from the guy at the front desk if you did park here, otherwise it's very expensive. So, at least a couple of us are going to go to Buffalo Billiards if anyone's interested. We can also hang out here for a few minutes if anyone wants to chat. Otherwise, thanks for coming out. Appreciate it. That's awesome, man.
Okay.
Thank you so much for stepping up.
Happy to.
When you texted me, you're like, Jay's not coming.
I have to invent a talk. How you doing?
Hey, Dan.
Ted. Very nice to meet you.
Yes, those stories do seem similar.
Oh, yeah?
Mine was, going to college and, this is fun. This is a hobby. This is a job.
It's not. I wouldn't pay for this.
Yeah.
I've done it since I was like 7. That's why I want to learn.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be miserable.
Mine was 7th grade in computer lab, breaking into the teacher's grading system. That was fun.
Oh, you did the old war games thing,
Yeah,
huh?
I got caught too, and then they were like, "We don't know what you did or how you did it. Could you just please not do that again?" There was no. It was 1991 or 2. Like, you know what's going on.
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
So you didn't get a cybercrime thing on your
No,
program?
my mom was a teacher there too, so I got a little leeway there.
So was it like literally war games where he just pulled the thing out and the password was like on the piece of paper?
No, I can't remember how I got. I can't remember how David did it. I mean, it wasn't exactly a secure system. So password probably like teacher or something like that.
No, it is funny. Everybody gets their start sometime.
I just remember liking computers from an early age when it was like the movie version of computers, which was this weird kind of Star Trek looking blocks with pointless blinky lights all over it. And it's like, that's a computer and it does something, it does everything or whatever, and then learning how to, I think it was my first program when I was in 7th grade. It was like on an Apple II, and we had these like Scantron cards, and each card was like equivalent to a line of BASIC, and so you had to like fill out all the things to make the instructions, and then if you screwed up, you had to erase it and it didn't work anymore. I mean, I only got 10 of them.
So my program, when I was a kid, I don't know if you guys remember those Infocom games, the text-based games. So I used to play those, of course, as a kid. That's actually what got me interested in programming, because I wanted to make a game like that. You know, something where I could put in my own dialogue and questions and stuff.
Yeah. Mine were always in BASIC. Always the you're in a room and you can go west, north.
Yeah, exactly.
With light, and then just that whole thing. I made it as big as I possibly could think to do.
That's cool. This is the exact.
So one time I wanted to do more with hardware, but it's mainly because I like to play with props.
Exactly what's happening now. So
It was,
I'm expecting.
you know, as I understand, electrical engineers don't really do that anymore. So. Oh, and I flunked out of electrical engineering.
That's when they open the wall. It's like, okay, now the contract. So yeah, that's
Get on the Slack channel.
The funny thing is,
What do I need to?
I have so many patients from my kids, and I have been trying to
If you just go to the meetup site, the link, I think it links to our site. It's like a self-sign-up thing.
Okay.
I need to practice again, like React.
So if you just go to
But I can do that. Well,
Edge
I've been
ATX.
doing it
No,
without.
over here. I just hop right over. Okay.
But it's like,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Faster
it's
than
like
that.
HTML, but it would
And
convert
this
to
is what you say that
JavaScript. But
your
instead of
environment
doing that.
So I was, I didn't realize this until last time I was here, and I was reading your bio on the web, and it said you were like were you one of the creators of EXC?
Yeah, originally it was me and one other guy that kind of started it, I guess, back in the day, 10 years ago now. So it's been a while.
It just sort of, for a second there, it reminded me of Bill Wazowski. It's like, you ever hear the Porky Huron statement? Or, I'm sorry, you ever hear the Chicago 7? That was me, and 6 other guys.
I was watching that actually like a couple of weeks ago.
Anyway, but
Yeah, no, I mean back then, it was back in late 2006. It was literally me and this other guy named Jack. We sort of,
it was designed to be sort of a web-based UI kit, basically.
pretty much. I mean, back then, 10, 11 years ago, there weren't a ton of options JavaScript-wise. There were frameworks out there. Like at the time, Dojo was probably the most popular. jQuery
I was using
just
Prototype back then.
Prototype was out there. there. jQuery like had just started when we were starting as well. But from like a UI perspective, Dojo at the time was probably the best open source free JavaScript framework in terms of UI widgets. And YUI had just come out like in the past year, but they were still missing some major components, like they didn't have a grid, for example. And so yeah, that was where we kind of came in. We originally used the YUI core library as our base, but then built all the UI widgets on top of it. And at the time, you know, they were pretty decent compared to what was out there. That was our original focus.
The thing that really turned me off about it was the very cryptic error messages that I would always get from it. I don't know if it was like that in the beginning. Now it's been years since I messed with it, but I just remember I was working with somebody who knew it pretty well, and I would get something and I was like, I have absolutely no idea what could be wrong with my code base. Yeah. Was that, I mean, is that still, or what? Do you use it still?
No, I mean, I'm not involved in it anymore. I got out of the company years ago. So, you know, the JavaScript world in general has kind of moved in a different direction. Cincha has kind of gone strictly enterprise, corporate, so it's quite a bit different than, you know, the state of the art in open source JavaScript is basically Angular 2, React, and those are quite a bit different philosophically, design-wise, than where Cincha's at this point.
I was going to say, they seem to be kind of solving a different problem.
Yeah, Cincha basically wants to be the full stack everything toolkit for enterprise. So organizations that have, you know, 50 developers that they need to get up and running, and money is no object, so they'll buy licenses and buy training and do the whole enterprise thing, and it's, you know, fully supported and all that. So those kinds of companies a lot of times don't want to go the open source route because they want to have enterprise support, they want to have consulting as an option, all that kind of stuff. So it's a different, yeah, totally different model.
The other issue was, I think we only had 5 seats, so it was like, you know, who was doing Cincha development was dependent on somebody quitting. It kind of reminded me, when I first looked at Backbone, it was just kind of like, this looks like a more stripped down version of EXTJS. There's like, you have sort of the same structure, but we don't have all the pre-built widgets. Was that fair to say?
Kind of a very loose comparison, I would say. Because EXTJS, one thing about it, it was always designed from the ground up to be kind of object-oriented. So it was very much like someone coming from a Java or C# background would feel very comfortable working with EXT code. Backbone, you know, they have collections, you know, based on some of the basic similar principles, but it's not really, I don't think anyone would call it like an object-oriented design.
I don't really know it well enough to, I probably know EXTJS better than that.
Yeah, I mean, Backbone is definitely a lot more, you know, building block, stripped down type of approach. So I think, I would say Backbone would be equivalent, like EXT, we had a core library called EXT Core, which just provided DOM, eventing, you know, basic stuff. And that probably would have been a lot closer to what Backbone is. And then of course we built all the widget stuff on top of that.
Yeah, those kinds of things are great. Like if you have
Much more interested in React just because
They get us in the loop with it.
it's so much more intuitive. That's one of the problems that I have with a lot of the frameworks is that none of the other ones are particularly intuitive.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at EXT, right? Fundamentally, it hasn't changed a ton in 6, 7 years, right? And it was originally designed 11, 12 years ago. So, like I said earlier, things have definitely changed quite a bit in terms of kind of best practices around JavaScript UI frameworks.
Sounds very promising.
From that perspective, yeah,
My kids are in the East.
it's kind of like going in a time machine to a certain extent. What was kind of the state of the art 12 years ago compared to what's the state of the art today?
So I think you were telling me it was your opinion that if you're doing anything complex, React is where it's at, or?
Off of Southwest.
I think I said that.
Man,
I don't know. I mean, React is good.
Push the kids in.
I wouldn't say complexity is like the yardstick I would use to measure that. Which one to use?
Well, I mean, he was saying it's like it's
so funny.
it gets a bit like if you're not dealing with something that you can really take advantage of React's
if you're sitting down in front
gives herself tasks and she does it.
the way it helps you reason about a complex app.
Like the unidirectional data flow.
Yeah, that kind of thing, and how it
That's how you feel like when you showed us.
single state tree is not really property of
For me,
React, but
I just like
it's
it's simple and
certainly
to the point.
everybody who uses React uses.
So I really,
It's more of like a best practice
Thank you so
pattern.
much for your time.
And that kind of thing, shines more in a more complex app as opposed to a similar app where, you're dealing with like two-way data flows or something, but it's an app that's small enough. It doesn't really matter that much.
Right, so what I would say is I think that's a good argument for saying, like, what's the difference between when you could get away with jQuery or Backbone versus moving to something like React. But it's not really an argument to favor React over Angular over Vue. So it's a slightly different discussion around, like, why would you pick Angular versus React? Because basically, all of those frameworks have some version of data model, event flow, all that kind of stuff, which jQuery and Backbone don't deal with any of that. So then the question becomes, okay, if you have a complex enough app where you need all that stuff, do you go React or Angular or do you use something else? And that's more nuanced question.
You're always trying to keep things secret.
Angular in general, but yeah, if you were starting today, you would definitely do Angular.
No, exactly.
I don't have like a super strong opinion. Like I kind of am not a huge fan of Angular, not because Angular is bad, just more of like a preference thing in terms of the way they approach certain things. It's not my preference. I feel a lot more comfortable with React and Vue, kind of the way they approach things philosophically. I also had a really bad experience with Angular 1. I know things have changed a lot, but
my only experience was
Well, let me look at it.
I just remember.
Well, I think that's one of the first things you guys.
It was some of the more advanced things with Angular are just like. I found this one guy, I forget what his name is, something Eastern European Terra something. Anyway, he had written or was writing a book called Build Your Own Angular. and where he's like discussing the Angular internals, and that was very helpful in understanding it. But the fact that you need that with Angular kind of makes me.
Where now it's the visibility of what the students.
Yeah, that's kind of what I like personally about React and Vue, for example, is that they're a lot more approachable, and you can just sort of read the source, and they don't come across as a science project the way Angular do. They come across as very approachable and very easy to kind of reason about your project. So, I think if I'm actually looking at Vue right now for new stuff that I'm doing. Ted's a big Vue proponent. We just talked about it last month in the meetup. It looks very interesting to me because it kind of combines the best of React with just sort of one thing with React is your options are basically to write JSX or to write procedural JavaScript. They sort of don't really use the template concept other than JSX, whereas in Vue you use first-class HTML templates and bind them sort of declaratively to the Vue kind of handling system. And again, it's not that it's good or bad, it's just that philosophically some people prefer different approaches. I personally have grown to really like the way Vue does things.
It almost sounds kind of like it's getting back to an MVC kind of pattern. Is that fair to say? I mean, I don't know anything about Vue, so.
I don't know. MVC is kind of a loaded term these days. I mean, you could probably.
Just the way data is flowing in an MVC system.
Yeah,
kind of React made me think that maybe that's like just not a good way to. That's just not a good. That's almost. I don't want to say anti-pattern, but it's almost it causes a lot of problems when you're trying to reason about a complex app. Now, like that's probably fairly naive statement. Let me preface it with that. And again, I don't know anything about Vue, but I guess, do you see where I'm going with that, or?
I mean, I'm not sure. Like, MVC is not really a useful way to think about it. Like MVC traditionally is more of server side to client side. When we're talking about JavaScript, that's all on the client. MVC isn't really the best model, I don't think, for how to think about it. There's not really a seed in there's a model, and then the whole thing is kind of a view. So there's not so much of a controller concept in it. It's more event-based. I don't know. It's just a different paradigm. I wouldn't call it MVC. It's more like the question would be like, well, what sort of are you trying to get across by when you say MVC? Like, what's the important concept that you're trying to compare it to?
I guess where I was going with that was kind of more it's more about
you guys been working on it? At least for better.
where the state lives and how it flows.
So from that standpoint, it's very similar to React. In fact, it's more flexible in the sense that React is kind of opinionated about the concept of one-way data flow. They don't enforce it, but that's what Flux is all about, right? It's sort of a pattern for doing that.
Well, we need, the next generation.
In Vue, it also defaults to that same exact pattern, but it actually gives you the option to do two-way data binding if you choose to. And I think the argument there would be similar to like the thing you said earlier about simpler applications. It might be appropriate to keep it simple and do jQuery backbone style development. And two-way data binding is actually very simple, right? The problem with it is that it doesn't scale very well as you add complexity. And so with Vue, though, you have that choice. So you can start that way, or if it's a small app, you can just do it that way. If it's a bigger app, you can do the more structured, kind of unidirectional, single-way data binding. approach. But it lets you choose. By the same token, it supports templated, declarative UI stuff, which React doesn't really support. And it also supports kind of the JSX or inline declarative style. React does as well. So again, you have choice, which I like.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's what I mean. It sort of has the best parts of React, and then it also has a little more flexibility.
What is the advantage, or sorry, what is the disadvantage of React's approach to that using JSX?
It's not good or bad. It's just your preference. Yeah, I mean, different people make different design choices when they build frameworks, and I don't dislike JSX. I think it's fine. But I've grown to appreciate the value of the templated way of doing it more declaratively better. It's more approachable.
What problem does it solve for you, or what is something that you don't like about the JSX approach or like about the template approach?
So the templated approach, I like the separation between the template and the declarative code. But I don't like when you have JSX mixed in with declarative JavaScript. I mean, essentially it's all declarative. Right. So it's sort of I would say it's cleaner for me, for someone who grew up with, doing web development, HTML, CSS development. I like the concept of having the template be something that lives on its own, that can render with or without JavaScript, whether or not it's functional, that, a less technical person could actually work on, a QA person can make sense of it. Like, those kinds of things have a certain amount of value.
I was just thinking of that as you were saying it, is that the way I had traditionally done development was I would be works like somebody else would be producing the actual HTML, CSS template, and I'd be the one going in and adding interactivity with JavaScript. And I guess with JSX, you really need somebody like, where does the guy who does the layout, who knows a lot about layout, how does he fit into the team?
Right. So you're sort of forcing that person to become a lot more technical, or you're introducing a translation step somewhere in there. Whereas when you can let someone work in a pure HTML template, at the bare minimum, they could do an entire bootstrap-based layout that looks really nice and it's just not reactive, and they can hand that off. And then in Vue, all I would have to do is decorate that markup with Vue specific attributes that would basically bind things to the model, and it would just work. And then I could add whatever code I needed, but they're separate.
Yeah, I saw that last presentation. That was
the other thing is, the reason I personally think that level of separation is important is for testing, like for unit testing. So in React, they have a story around unit testing, but it's a lot more complex to deal with unit testing when you're testing markup kind of as output. Like you're outputting, when your code is based on JSX, then the output of that code is markup. And so like the testing revolves around validating whether the markup coming out of your function is good or bad, which is fine. But I personally prefer the separation where the unit testing can focus on the procedural JavaScript code and you're testing the data, input and output, and that part of it is sort of separated from the layout part of it. I find that easier to do.
I don't know how this works in practice because I've only seen it in
we have a whole.
I don't know if it's Shadow Dome.
Videos from like Dan Abramov.
Shadow Dome would be.
He's always talking about breaking up your components into the presentational portion versus versus the container component.
And so the way it's architected,
you have this thing that's strictly concerned with the markup.
Because the markup is in there,
and you have another language.
Oh yeah. Well, they're normally in here, and we're normally over there. So
it's almost
you can't
take something
who just get enough to be dangerous.
Here's scissor tell.
I guess what I'm saying, well, so container versus component things, that's like a slightly different thing. You can, Vue kind of actually has that same concept. It's more about when you have a functional component that takes in data and outputs some UI state. The difference is in React code, or in actually, you can do this in Vue too. You can write actually JSX in Vue if you choose to. What I don't like about writing business logic code that outputs JSX is that it complicates how you validate it. So I prefer the procedural business logic code to just be code that takes in data, outputs values, and then let
And you can put this into
the UI part of it just happen through the binding the way Vue does. So that rather than outputting a fully fledged block of HTML, you're just outputting a value, and Vue handles binding it to the template and creating the HTML for you behind the scenes. So again, it's not that it's good or bad. It's
I like it because it's
a different approach, and I prefer it just because of the way I prefer thinking about unit testing and sort of the level at which that's done.
React, it took me a week to wrap my head around React.
Again, I mean, it's all opinion, right? I think React is great.
Why am I having to do this silly dance?
You have to choose based on what you like or don't like. All things being equal. I think React and Vue and Angular, for that matter, they're all tools that can sort of do the same job. So all other things being equal, you're going to pick the tool that you find most comfortable or whatever.
Essentially take me.
Like I said, I don't really know React supports very well. I don't know Angular supports all that well either, but I have a stronger sense of what they are than I do with React.
You just keep going horizontal.
Exactly. So it's not a big deal to me to make them more productive.
I mean, it's certainly the thing you're talking about, where you need to have a more technical designer.
Yeah, that's a good feeling.
And then we can step away from the project,
which is then a pain because when your design changes, they can't work together. But
exactly, yes, that's the thing.
I can literally I can just step away from the project and nobody knows that.
That's awesome.
Pictures behind you are distracting.
It's 9 o'clock, so I got to start cleaning up over here. Sorry, but
yeah, I'm gonna go to the bar.
I am.
Yeah, I'm going.
I gotta show you guys this deployment thing though, because it's relevant to what you were doing.
Is your wife father?
This is what I've been working on.
Oh, that's my
It's pretty quick. So I have just a code file here, just to demonstrate. It's just code, it's basically a web page. But the part that's more interesting is you come over to this deployment. This point here, is coming now, working real well with Windows.
Hey, Curry, what was the name of the contact you mentioned, Vince?
Oh, Ryan Weiss.
Ryan Weiss.
And another person had to just. So now we have.
So pull the project.
Pull the project. Pull the screenshot because that's what CodeWizards does. And it generates a badge code here, so that you can pop this out on your. Like the original intent was to do this on GitHub. To have a little badge that says deploy to localhost. But we've got a test thing here. So it generates this really gnarly link, but it gives you the badge, and now it's here.
is quite a URL.
Yeah, that's because
Oh,
it
okay.
is a
They've
lot of
got-
JSON.
Do you actually need that to be unique across the multiverse?
Well,
Like just our universe
Is
isn't
it the
enough?
full zip files and the URL?
It's the.
Like,
it's
I'm pretty
the,
sure that's more than the atoms in the universe. Isn't it?
Probably. It has, it's the JSON that's been compressed down, and then it's been encrypted and minified. The encryption is really unnecessary. It's more so just because it shrinks it, because I didn't want to run into, you know. I figured 1,000 characters was probably enough. 10,000 would have been a bit much.
Yeah, 2,000 you hit IEs on it.
Yeah, exactly.
IE falls down.
48.
But the cool part about this is, that's the new one on Windows. I just launched this entire site. I downloaded it. Come on.
So you have the,
Oh, yeah, UT Austin.
is it Phoenix?
Yeah, Phoenix.
Phoenix. Okay, so you have Phoenix running locally. And what you're essentially doing is you're deploying, you're basically passing all the data around by URL.
It's just the data that basically says here's what the zip file is and here's the information to make it look pretty on the page. That's all it is. At the end, like that deployment process, this is now running on my local host on this port, and it's fully functional.
I missed the context at the beginning of what we were looking at.
Okay.
So he went from CodePen, he pasted a CodePen URL in Phoenix
and
online,
now it's running locally?
and then created it, and then created a tab, clicked the tab, and now it's running locally. So like it's basically moving the zip file.
I gotta go. I'll
downloading,
see you guys
extracting.
next month.
Take it easy.
I shot you an email if you wanna send me these.
I'll send you his contact, and I'll make sure that you don't, that you
The
survive.
idea is,
All right.
like this is.
Take it easy.
This is Graham's framework, and the idea is that you put a local host, button on
It
here.
isn't just the
But in order to get that
It's
button,
kind of like a deploy to Heroku.
it's exactly like that, except it's going local.
I got you.
So,
that was just.
yeah, and so that's what this whole thing is about. And,
Down 30%. What's the latest figure after
That's
putting
UX
up
there.
their elephant, talk
Last
about
one?
elephant.
Yeah, that
was like
that was
anywhere
a
in the overlay to
fucking
this
herd of
website.
elephants in the room.
That's because
that they just ignored for so many years.
that's
But
not
I-
my,
I've got-
that's my
I
UX,
have a
not
Wells Fargo
Graham's.
account, so, I'm not mad at it because I'm, I quote it, technically a customer in there. It's just.
Oops,
It's just spelled it wrong. It's just so dirty. On the other hand, even credit unions still have to have,
Oh, right, that's because.
you still need to have
Sorry.
your members in.
Yeah, so that one's not gonna work on here.
Cooperative live, there has to be.
Well,
More money taken in
is-
than it is.
Yeah, I'm not gonna be able to put down the GitHub one right now because I have a problem with the Harvester, but yeah, the idea is that we've got a page where we're gonna have a whole bunch of different boilerplate code, just deploy whatever you want, good to go. Yeah, in Graham's project, or his showroom that shows off chassis,
And
it
USC is really
deploys and then there's a gulp file, built, theme, everything's built for you, it's kind of like just press and go.
If people stay around because.
So that's what we've been working on over the last 2 weeks or so here, which has been, and the cool thing about it is, we actually have a school using it already. And it's not any old school, it's MIT, so it's kind of,
There you go.
yeah.
There you go, that's a school.
So they reached out to me, so they're using Phoenix too, and they're like, they were talking about the ability to toggle, like, so these features here, like the ability to change the default file, they wanted to have something other than index.html.
So I had a.
Like, well, you can't do that in Phoenix 2, but, you're like, check out Phoenix 3, and they're like, this is great. Yeah, and they were like, what's this deployment thing, which is in,
That I was asking to.
there's just a bunch of features, like basic stuff that you can set up, and I'd accidentally released that. And they're like, what is this thing? And so I showed it to them, and they're like, this is pretty badass, I'd like to use
2 or
it.
3 months.
Awesome.
This time this one has to.
So, yeah.
We look at you on the phone. It was correct.
Well, yeah, you should definitely do a lightning talk on that
I
maybe next
intend
time.
to. I'd like to, what I'm hoping for is I actually am going to talk with Angel Hack about using this because we bought hackathonresources.com and intend to set this up as like a boilerplate thing for that. So I'm hoping that that will be done by next month, because if so, then I can either do a lightning talk on it or, there's a couple of other things that I think could be kind of fun. So,
They won't lower their rate on the cable.
but that would just be a nice intro, because
I figured the other reason I told you to skip it tonight is because it was kind of a light crowd.
yeah.
So I figured we could wait till we get more of our normal crowd.
One phone call.
Well, I've just been wanting to show this more to you guys than anybody, because, you know, I've been working on this thing for too damn long.
I could have closed my account and then in there for the funds, but he's like, I'm going to see that you do have some.
I would have thought just the local SSL would have a checkbox.
I have that too.
Yeah, I know. I thought that was,
Yeah.
So you probably, you need to contact them as soon
Yeah,
as
there's
possible.
local.
So he had a script, I mean, they're trained. And this was 2 years ago, and I was doing it. So,
Like,
but they
you know,
did
how to
work.
use a self-sign
But they did work.
cert.
There will be a point where I will go ahead and
That
actually,
doesn't happen.
now that I
Trying
know
to
how
figure
to
out how to get
keep from getting,
We've got a mobile app that we started with for them, because so my brother, he works for a company called Edio, and they have, why would you CMS for high school, and they're always testing
it's
stuff
just
on
a
mobile.
free account that I had.
He's like,
you
it'd
know,
be really
for
useful to
almost
have,
10
you know,
years.
just like a mobile app where I can see all the different sites that
So
I'm used
just
to.
have it,
As
it's
well
one of
as
those
they
things,
wanted
it
to
is
do
hard,
over
I
SSL,
really do
but
have
I'm trying
automatic
to
withdrawals.
right now figure out
It's
how I
just the
can
thought,
get,
okay, what do I have this
actually,
tied
how I
to?
can
If
share
I
in
cancel
some
this,
consistent
what
manner across
repercussion
multiple
do
mobile
I have?
devices.
Then
to
it's
access
much
the
more
team,
difficult.
access the ones like
And it just don't
nightmare.
do that,
So
because I'm not good at keeping
that's the
records.
one I'm trying to wrap my head around, and it feels like a
Yeah,
problem.
that's, but I am with OCD now. So that's how much more I have back.
Yeah, that one, I'm not sure we're gonna
I'm
take that one.
So I did do the credit union space a long time ago. At least I got that nose to it. But with free account, yeah, the ATM on site, that was kind of a no-brainer. Yeah, so. Okay, anyways, well, it's good meeting you. Take care. Gentlemen, thank you so much for tonight. Appreciate your work and doing all this. Meetups don't work.
Hey, Brian. Yeah, how's it going? It's funny, I was just thinking about you recently, thinking, I haven't checked in on Montage lately.